Climate change, by its definition, is a transboundary issue. Pakistan's crisis is multifaceted, but most importantly, it's a governance. I think primarily it's a governance issue. Finance is secondary unless they are duly approved and duly notified. Pakistani climate change agenda is not, technically speaking, eligible for climate financing in the budget or a wish list. And a wish list cannot be binding on others. Stronger governance make you an investable country. Climate change is a development issue. Talking about climate change is not talking about more floods only or increase in temperature. It's not that we have to start from zero. The moment we are able to spend with the required speed, the inflow will also increase.
Hello and welcome to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Mahin Azam Khan. Every budget season, we hear a familiar concern. Pakistan is not spending enough on climate action. Yet, as the country faces increasing climate risks, from devastating floods and extreme heat to worsening water scarcity, the conversation around climate finance is becoming more complex. Perhaps the more important question is this: why do some climate initiatives receive funding while others remain aspirations on paper? What determines whether a climate priority becomes a budget line, a development project, or simply another policy commitment? These are the questions shaping the future of climate governance in Pakistan. Today, we're joined by Ali Tauqeer Sheikh, one of Pakistan's leading experts on climate policy and governance, to discuss climate-smart budgeting, the relationship between policy and public finance, and what Pakistan must do to strengthen the foundations of effective climate action. Let's begin. Hello, Sheikh Saab. Thank you so much for joining us today. So every budget season, we hear concerns that climate finance remains inadequate. However, some argue, that the real issue may not be the amount of money available, but whether the policies, needed to unlock that funding are actually in place. So is Pakistan actually facing a climate finance problem, or is it facing a climate governance problem?
I think primarily it's a governance issue. Finance is secondary, it's not the primary. In Pakistan's economic context, there are three ways to look at it. One is that Pakistan, of course, has a very tight fiscal space. So many things that we want to do, we may not have enough resources to do. The second thing is that there may be many things we wish to do, but they may not be policymakers' priority. And climate change falls in that category very often, like health and education and urban planning and waste management. And the third is that do we have a policy ecosystem or policy infrastructure to be eligible to receive financing from the government's budget under the Federal Appropriation Act? The budget is allocated under that act. And my understanding is that none of Pakistan's policies are formally approved and duly notified. And unless they are duly approved and duly notified, Pakistani climate change agenda is not, technically speaking, eligible for climate financing in the budget. And of course, government can make allocations outside the budget and it can hedge it under different umbrellas. Governments can play in different ways. But in order for us to be right and proper and to be technical eligible, Pakistan needs to get its policies approved and notified.
Absolutely. And, just adding a little bit to what you just said, that there's also a key argument that, climate policies and strategies, just like you mentioned, they often exist on paper, but lack the legal standing needed to influence, government spending as well. And like you mentioned, that climate is not a high priority for the government. So why does the formal approval and gazette notification of climate policy matter for budgeting and implementation?
Pakistan has a very elaborate policy-making systems, and a policymaker will not deliberately avoid them. Now, if I don't have something, it's like if I don't have a dry cleaner's receipt, I cannot go and ask for clothes. I need to have an evidence. Policy is an evidence that it's a government priority and duly approved by the government. And And when it is duly approved in shape of notified, it has two benefits. One, it is visible to the policymakers who are making budgets, finance ministry people. Second, it is visible to the superior courts as a right of the people. A cabinet decision is in principle a confidential decision, except for the press release that announces that the following decisions were made. The decisions that need to be implemented will be notified as a SRO. Unless it is notified as SRO, it's not a legal right, and the courts cannot be approached for justice. Now, the climate change has two or three very special aspects also. If we don't get it approved, then it is not binding on anyone. If I'm sitting in a Ministry of Education and if it is not duly approved, I cannot go to Health Ministry and the Planning Ministry and others to support my policy. I can go only if now climate policies, since they are typically approved only by the ministry, they're not binding on anyone. And as soon as our policy is affecting a province or more than one province, it has to be approved by the provinces through CCI, Council of Common Interest. Now, Council of Common Interest is the most innovative institution Pakistan's constitution has to create a consensus on national priorities. When something is approved by CCI, then it is binding on all the provinces. None of these documents, like climate change policy, like biodiversity policy, forestry policy, urban policy, clean air policy, there's a long list of wetlands, housing, and so on and so forth. None of that from the Ministry of Climate Change has been duly approved by Council of Common Interest because it was not presented there for the agenda. So none of these is implemented by them. So what happens is, after a year or two, we complain that the provinces are not implementing. They are not implementing. There may be many reasons, but an important reason is that they are not party to that policy. It is a top-down essay or a wish list, and a wish list cannot be binding on others.
Absolutely. Like you just mentioned that the overall process obviously is also very elaborate when it comes to Pakistan. And, yet if the legal status remains unclear of these policies, but still many of these policies are frequently, cited in national and international discussions. So what happens when, these climate policies are treated as guiding documents rather than legally enforceable government policy?
These are anomalies, and a healthy, good governance in country will not have that. That's why at the beginning I said Pakistan's crisis is multifaceted, but most importantly, it's a governance. So we need to have our house in order. I just want to give you an example of NDC. Pakistan has submitted 3 NDCs to UNFCCC. Now, UNFCCC is the Secretariat of Climate Change Convention. Anything that we submit there, that becomes our sovereign commitment. The world expects from us that we will implement this. And then we can go to the international forum and say that for the implementation, we are resource constrained and we need international climate finance for that support. To that extent, it becomes very binding on us. When it comes back to the country level, then I'm not sure if it is notified by the cabinet and enforceable by the courts. And then I'm not sure if it has gone to CCI for approval, and therefore there is no provincial stamps on it. The provinces are not a constitutional party to it. They are not signatory to this. So NDC is not binding on them. It's only a suggestion. And no wonder, in a number of sectors that NDC deals with, the progress on the ground in the provinces is very nominal, very negligible, and oftentimes the reasoning offered to us is superfluous, that we don't have resources. Yes, we have resource constraint, but then it's not a priority. Now, if it was a priority, then we would have a legal foundation for it to support. So even if we had the finances, which provinces do now because of NFC awards, they have more money than they can spend.
Yeah.
And therefore they are engaging in a lot of activities, and they're not prioritized activities in the climate change context. There may be their provincial priorities. So therefore my argument is, and this is a very important article for the policymakers to pay attention to, the parliamentarians to pay attention to, and the judiciary to pay an attention to rectify this omission. If this omission is rectified, I want to point out one more point here. Climate change, by its definition, is transboundary issue. It's an interprovincial issue. So unless the provincial sign off, it will not happen. Now, it is also a multi-sectoral issue. It has a bearing on energy, it has a bearing on agriculture, housing, urban planning, and so on and so forth. Whenever climate change ministry makes a policy in any sector, like youth, like gender, housing, and so on and so forth, plastics, there's a fight or a conflict with the concerned ministry. For example, Ministry of Climate Change some years wanted to promote renewable energy, and they set some targets for EV market in Pakistan. And they created a policy also. It was also approved by the Prime Minister. But then the concerned ministry objected. And now 7 years later, we don't have a policy and we don't have a national target that covers the entire EV sector. So it's very important that the interministerial fights are resolved by clarifying the mandate, that whose mandate it is to work on these issues. So right now there are parallel institutions. We have Climate Change Authority, we have the ministry, and then we have sector ministries, a lot of them. And that does not always help.
Absolutely. And I think talking about another policy that we've seen, the National Climate Finance Strategy, that has been presented as an important framework for mobilizing climate action and investment. What are the implications of, launching major climate strategies, without formal approval and adoption through government processes?
It's embarrassing that a sophisticated and well-developed country like Pakistan goes to an international forum and its finance minister goes and launches a policy that was not signed off by his own ministry. It's very embarrassing. It is almost 3 years to that. That policy has still not been notified, whereas it exists in donor documents. Just the way NDC exists in donor documents or climate change policy exists in donor documents, the urgency with which Pakistan should have completed its notification diminishes because the environment changes. There are several other examples where one can say that we launch policies at international forums. They become citable documents for the donors and development partners. But in reality, it doesn't work in Pakistan. For example, GCF provided a lot of support for Gender Action Plan, running into millions. It took us several years to develop that action plan. In donor documents, Pakistan has a gender action plan, but it was developed by the Ministry of Climate Change because it's a focal point ministry with the GCF. They had the contact there. They knew that the window of opportunity exists. They accessed that. But then it was beyond their depth and mandate to actually have a policy. So you have a policy, but nobody knows that there is an action plan. And the result is that the State Bank had its own guidelines, SCCP has its own guidelines, Commission on the Status of Women has another set of guidelines, Planning Commission has another set of guidelines. It has become a habit in this country that for the same country, 3, 4, or 5 institutions would develop their policies or guidelines. Just to give you one more example. For the flood management, NDMA has a policy, FFC has a policy, Pakistan Planning Commission has a special unit for this, and it doesn't stop there. The warnings come from Pakistan Met Department that sometimes are ignored by other institutions. And then when we go to the provinces, then there are PDMAs and other ministries and duplications. Presently, there are at least 4 flood management plans that exist in the country, and they are parallels. Country can have more than one. I'm not opposed to that. But then you have to sit together and develop a hierarchy, eliminate duplications, and then you prioritize that this is the action and which ministry or department will do what. All of them cannot be doing the same thing. By the way, I did not mention 1122, that evacuated a large number of people in the last floods very successfully. So these mandates need to be clarified, and they are not at this point.
Absolutely. And while we're discussing climate policies, I'd just like to touch upon the fact that, it is often focused now that, Pakistan should focus more on adaptation rather than mitigation. And on that note, we also have a national adaptation plan, and it's often considered one of Pakistan's most important climate planning documents. But just like you mentioned that, there is, a very complicated process when it comes to these policies in Pakistan. So despite, receiving cabinet approval, why has the National Adaptation Plan, struggled to translate its dedicated budget allocation and implementations?
See, this is a very unique document. It is perhaps the only document that I know of after the 18th Amendment that was approved by the cabinet. But for whatever reason, it was not notified subsequently. Therefore, it's not communicated to other ministries that there are actions for them to do. So they don't know it exists. And then because it was not approved by CCI or any, CCI is the primary forum, every other approving authority is a secondary approving authority. And therefore, it's not binding on the provinces either. And they, technically speaking, they formally do not know that it exists. But it brings attention to a deeper problem. And the deeper problem is hidden in your question. That, yes, any province could have raised and developed their own action plan. And that could have added to the mess, but also to the ownership. Mess in the sense that we may have had more than one national action plans, but at least we would have seen that the provinces have prioritized. And now when they have under National Finance Commission, loads of money going to them, they could have prioritized some of those things from their own policies on those issues. When the documents are developed on suggestion or support of donors, they are not always the best thing to have. State Bank of Pakistan developed green taxonomy. SCCP has developed guidelines for ESG. Planning Commission has developed guidelines and targets and whatnot for SDGs. But because they have not been notified by due forums, they are not binding for others. At least I know in case of green taxonomy, those who are supposed to implement them, they don't know about them, just if they don't know about NAP that you asked me about. So the coherence is very important, and it's not very difficult or expensive thing to do. I know we are short of time, but I do want to say this. There are certain things which will require new legislation. This will not require a new legislation. There are many things that will require lots of financing, and Pakistan may not have financing. It will not require financing. It may not be priority, it needs to become priority. And then constituting task forces and committees will not resolve that. You just need to make sure that it needs to be done and have the tenacity and the focus, and within a few months, we can have answer to these 3 things. One, these documents are duly approved and notified that I have referred to. Number 2, those documents that need to be on the CCI agenda and need to be approved by CCI should be put on the agenda and meeting be convened and they be approved. And then third, there's not clarity on mandates and this infighting that I referred to. It can be clarified by revising the rules of business. And these are only 3 things to be done. And these things are all doable and within the capacities and competencies of present decision-making institutions.
Absolutely. So I think it would be safe to conclude that, if these policies are taken to the Council of Common Interests, it would ensure that, the provinces will become active partners in implementation rather than just be, passive recipients of federal guidance, right?
That's right. And implication is even bigger. Of course, we want to be proper, we want to be right, we want to be constitutional, we want to be transparent, and it will strengthen our governance. But stronger governance is not an abstract concept. Stronger governance make you an investable country. Those who wish to invest in the climate change areas of Pakistan, and we just talked about more than a dozen in a short interview. These are all areas that require international investment. And for each one of them, there is international finance available. And people move away from Pakistan, and we use different excuses for that. For example, terrorism or something. They all may be valid, but all of them are secondary. The first thing that people want to see is that would there be return on my investment if I go to Pakistan compared to another country? Would there be good accountability of my spending, and will I be able to trace a dime where it goes and where it was allocated? And then we know who will be the players, where it will go, which community it will serve, what purpose it will, and what will be the result, what will be the impact. All that will be the result of these three actions that I just mentioned we need to do. And if we are able to do that on a short period of time, before next year's budget is presented, I think Pakistan can be a climate climate investment ready country in terms of its fitness.
Absolutely. Just coming back to the previous conversation that we were having about the NDCs, you mentioned that Pakistan has made, ambitious commitments under the Paris Agreement through its nationally determined contributions, or the NDCs. And we also spoke about, the gaps also. How do you think that the gap between international climate commitments and domestic implementation can be bridged, especially in Pakistan?
See, international climate finance environment is not the most conducive one. Last year in January, American administration left UNFCCC, withdrew from the Paris Agreement. But fortunately, no other country has followed them. Then he pressurized NATO allies and others to increase their defense. So they started reallocating financing from climate change to their defense to save their NATO security issues and respond to American pressure. And therefore, the expansion of international finance has not happened the way it was anticipated, while the needs are growing. Now, for whatever little financing are available, they are accessible for Pakistan at a much higher rate than we have accessed so far. But the problem is we need to work on our credibility. And the credibility means if we can generate some domestic resources to show our equity and seriousness, then international finance can come as a partner. There can be blended finance category in particular. I just want to give you an example. 3 steps Pakistan will need to do overcome this. One is the policy infrastructure. We talked about this. Second is to earnestly spend the revenue or the taxes that we generate on climate-related issues. If we have carbon tax, or if we have carbon development levy and so on and forth, and that's 1.5 trillion rupees, very large sum. But if it is not spent on climate, we lose credibility. So we need credit. And third is solicit investments from private sector. Climate change is a development issue. If your country is short of financing, you need to reach out to the private sector in the country that has money and it's looking for opportunities to invest. If you cannot provide them opportunities to invest, they will go to Dubai or Africa or elsewhere to invest. The question is, how do we reach out to them? So the government will need to weaken its monopoly on investments and ensure that every project that it supports under PSDP has a private sector component to it. It should challenge, persuade, cajole, do whatever. Now, once the private sector gets involved in Pakistan's own development agenda, international finance will also follow.
Absolutely. I think just like you summed it up brilliantly, actually, that the government actually needs to let go of its monopoly. And like you mentioned before as well, that there has to be coherence, between all the stakeholders in society. Otherwise, we won't come to a solution. We also mentioned that, often at times, because Pakistan has so many gaps in its policy, that, jurisdictional disputes often emerge. Especially when climate policy intersects with sectors such as transport, agriculture, housing, and industry. To what extent are institutional overlaps and competing mandates slowing down climate action in Pakistan when this happens?
There's a lot of duplication of institutions. I gave you example, but in the conversation, for last several years has been focusing on these redundancies and the need to streamline that. But then there is also need to expand the conversation. I want to give an example. The scientific projections show that heat waves that were strong heat waves that were coming once in 1,000 years will become and have become a yearly event in Pakistan and India, right? So the incidence of heat waves has increased in the country. We don't realize, we always talk there are 2.5 million or 3 million people, children out of school. We do not always realize that because our population is very young, this is the largest segment of young people getting affected by heat waves in the world. There's no other country where heat wave affects as many people as in Pakistan. And it affects in many, many ways. I just want to give you an example how we want to expand our conversation. Sometimes we get a data that as many schools were destroyed, but we never tell how many students were affected, for how many days the education was disrupted, because we use our schools as refuge centers. And then they keep on serving as refuge centers and school never reopens. And because of frequent disasters, teachers, and usually female teachers, never come back. The enrollment drops. When you have $30 million loss, you never tell that we have 500,000 children who never came back to school. And their cognitive skills, their capability skills, it's not only loss of education year, it's loss of their life cycle and their children's life cycle. We don't have the ability and resources to focus on those things, and we barely talk about the destruction of school and its repair, and even that doesn't happen. So in my humble view, talking about climate change is not talking about more floods only or increase in temperature. It's a development issue for us. We need to look at how does it affect our health and well-being, how does it affect our children and their learning and their education, and things go from there. So once we prioritize it as a development issue, we will know exactly what to do. And then we'll know exactly what health ministry needs to do and education ministry needs to do and others need to do. But for now, we have kept our discussion on the ninth cloud, so to speak. We don't get our feet on the ground what the real issues are that climate change is confronting us. And therefore, more than duplication, the question is also expanding the conversation to reach out to those who will get more affected, and they compromise Pakistan's ability for an accelerated economic growth rate.
And I think the conversation has, expanded in some sectors, while we're
Yes.
focused on the gaps. I think it's so important to discuss the solutions as well. because many institutions have actually developed some frameworks related to sustainability, green finance, and climate resilience. So are
Absolutely.
Pakistan's efforts suffering from an abundance of strategies and frameworks, but a shortage of legally binding implementation mechanisms?
You summed it up very nicely, very aptly. Um, yes, and also top-down policies developed by consultants with the help of international finance are usually not the best policies. The best policies are the ones that are developed at the local level and then they become bottom up. They are the ones who will know what their adaptation and mitigation challenges are, and they will know what their priorities need to be. And then we take it to the district level and the provincial level. And NFC award has the provision to take the financing from the provincial level to the district level. So we are very close to it. We are very fortunate in that sense. We just have to have the last mile conversation in this country that how do we get there?
And I hope we get there soon because this is an urgent issue that will not leave us because it has become our reality now, unfortunately. And just to, sum up this conversation, we've talked about some extremely key reforms which are often suggested and which you also suggested, that Gazette notifying key climate policies, strengthening provincial ownership through the CCI, and clarifying institutional mandates because everyone needs to know what exactly their mandate is. So, just to sum it up, do you think that these policies will have a great impact on climate action in Pakistan in the coming years, right?
Absolutely, I'm very optimistic. Many of these are our political economy issues. They are complex, but they are surmountable. We can resolve them. These are last mile issues. It's not that we have to start from zero. We have done plenty of work in the last several decades. It's just that now we are realizing that this is not enough. And we need to have a big step forward in terms of the action and implementation and then prioritizing the issues at the local level, transferring resources there, putting our equity in there to have credibility to access international climate finance. Um, it's, the last point in this regard, when the government does not have the ability to transfer resources to the local level, local government level, and local community level, it will not have a lot of spending capacity. So it will waste money by developing more and more documents than lessons of implementation. And important part of that is its spending capacity gets diminished. No wonder most of international climate finance in Pakistan, like Pakistan's national projects at the federal level, never get implemented. We have a very big challenge in absorptive capacity. We can't spend what we access. And that is not because we're lazy or something. It's just that how much money I can spend to renovate this house. Beyond that, I'll need to think of bigger questions. And therefore, likewise, how many more projects you can have at the federal level. We need to think differently. And the reason we are not able to spend and our absorptive capacity is so thin, and every project is delayed project. It's causing us a reputational damage that don't invest in Pakistan. They can't finish the project. The solution is simplistic in some ways, but very complex at the same time. Transfer resources where the need is, and then see the speed with which they can spend. The moment we are able to spend with the required speed, the inflow will also increase. Right now, there are choke points that hamper the inflow of resources. The last point in this regard, I just want to mention. If you look at this year's budget, you will see that the Planning Commission has several trillion rupees worth of throw forward. More than 1,000 projects and more than 10 trillion rupees. Throw forward is unfinished projects. Now, unfinished project means the project cost goes up. Unfinished project means that you start 100 billion rupees worth of project give them 5-10 billion only for vehicles and rentals and salaries, and then the actual project gets delayed and delayed and delayed. There are projects that are 5, 10, 20 years old, and we're just paying them minimum to keep those people in the job. So throw forward means very costly for economy. And the throw forward happens because if a ministry does not have the capacity to implement 10 projects, how we can develop 5 more new projects for them? They will not be able to implement that. And we have not undertaken any assessment of any ministry, how much they can generally spend. Education department in Punjab or health department in Sindh. These are the questions they need to ask. Instead of adding project after project as a wish list, and there are heaps of projects with ministries that and departments at the provincial level that have been sitting there for years and years and years. And that makes it very inefficient. And more inefficient we are, less money we'll have for climate resilience. So these are linked with our core topic that the policies just not need to be notified, but then there are next steps also. How do we transfer resources to the local level to create these clogs that have appeared in our operating system? And if we do that, Pakistan's economy will be like a Purple Heart.
I'm going to stick to what you just said also, that, we have to expand the conversation, and we have to let go of the monopoly mindset that we have. And we have to realize that how should we transfer our resources efficiently. And the most important thing is that we need to know that we are not starting from zero, like you summed it up. And the conversation is getting better and the momentum is getting better. So let's hope that, this year is a better year for Pakistan. Thank you so much, Sheikh Saab, for your brilliant insights. And it has been an absolute honor, like always. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Today's discussion reminds us that climate action is about far more than ambitious announcements or international commitments. It is about ensuring that climate priorities are supported by the policies, institutions, and governance structures needed to turn ideas into action. As Pakistan confronts increasingly severe climate risks, the challenge is not only mobilizing climate finance, but also creating the policy architecture that allows climate investments to be planned, funded, and implemented effectively. Thank you for watching Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm Mahin Azam Khan. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that building climate resilience begins not only with resources, but with the institutions and policies that make lasting change possible.